Good evening to members, officers, members of the public and press, if we have anyone with us tonight. Welcome to this planning meeting of the 23rd of June. As always, a little bit of housekeeping. We're back in our own home now, as we call it. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door, which is to my right but to your left, and do not use the lifts in the foyer. Please assemble in Hawley Square opposite the offices, and an officer will assist you and advise you when it is deemed to be safe to return to this chamber. Does anybody intend to film the meeting? Could they please show their hands? No, thank you very much. Moving on, restrictions on mobile phones. Would everybody present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while this meeting is in progress. This evening I have requests for speaking under Council Procedure 20.1. Councillors Braidwood, Gregory, Farrance and Boyd speaking on item 4, which is land of northwest of and southeast sides of Shottendane Road. If there's any member not on the committee who wishes to speak under 20.1, could they please say so? Thank you very much. Public speaking. The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Would members please strike through following the items on the agenda? Agenda item 5A, A01, 3, the Knot. Agenda item 5F, D06, land rear of 4 to 10 Station Road, which is in Birchington. Thank you for that, members. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Livingston, who has a point of information.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. Point of information for members on agenda item 4, the Shottendane Road application this evening. After the date of the previous planning committee on the 21st of April 2021, the council received a freedom of information request asking for information on any agreements held by the council relating to the historic sale of any part of the site which is the subject of the application. This search has shown that Thanet District Council previously owned the northern parcel of land to the north of Shottendane Road, and an agreement for the sale of this land in 1982 included an overage clause, meaning that if the land is used for any other purpose than agriculture, the owner is liable to pay the council 50% of the change in value. As members of the planning committee are aware, covenants or ownership matters are not material planning considerations, and therefore this historic agreement cannot be taken into account by members in making either determination as to whether or not the planning application is acceptable when judged against local and national planning policy. As an additional point for information for members of the public, the process and procedure of planning committee meetings, including the format of the meeting and the order of public speaking, is outlined within Part 5 of the Council's Constitution entitled Codes and Protocols. The relevant section is the Protocol for Guidance of Planning Committee Members and Officers, and this is available on the Council's website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillor Alban, who's been substituted by Councillor Whitehead. Also Councillor Scott, who's substituted by Councillor Fellows. Are there any other apologies? Thank you, members. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interest at all? Hands in the air? No, okay, thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the planning committee meeting held on the 19th of May 2021. Do members agree that the minutes of the planning committee meeting held on the 19th of May 2021 be approved and signed by myself as chair? Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Hart. I do apologise, it is difficult to see people with masks on, so hence I've got mine down here at the moment. Thank you, Councillor Hart. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Paul Moore. Thank you, Councillor Moore. Do you all agree? Thank you, members. Agenda item 4 is the planning application, the land on the northwest and south-east sides of Shottendane Road. Speaking under Council Procedure 20.1, could I ask Councillor Braywood? Is there? I thought so. Thank you, Councillor Braywood. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I must admit, Chair, that I find Ian Livingstone's comments regarding the 15% affordable housing, in which he described as fair, an insult to this committee and actually an insult to this council. As members of this committee will be well aware, last July this council adopted something called a local plan. This local plan was independently signed off and deemed sound. Page 59 of the local plan states, and I quote, that an area of more than 1,000 square metres shall be required to provide 30% of the dwellings as affordable housing. I'll read that again. That an area of more than 1,000 square metres shall be required to provide 30% of the dwellings as affordable housing. We're told that if the development was to be increased to 30%, then the development would be in a deficit. Remember, Gladmans are a land promoter and not a land developer. The lower the affordable housing percentage, the higher the land cost. We as a council cannot bend the rules to suit certain developers. We have a local plan, which developers will be well aware of. If they cannot meet the requirements, then don't buy the land. Simple. I ask this committee to show courage, show bravery and to show respect to your constituents that elected you. Show them that we welcome development in Thanet, of course we do, but only when the local plan is being adhered to. This application should not be deferred for a second time, and the developers should not be given a third chance. This should be rejected due to the SP23 not being achieved. And if this application is rejected and it goes to appeal, then so be it. If there's a cost to the council, then so be it. This council has thrown away money from day dot and will continue to throw away money in the future. But some decisions are worth spending the money on. And if I may, Chair, I just want to quickly draw a reference to the KCC officer's report that we heard at the last committee meeting. He assured us that an extra 450 houses at Shottendane Road will have no impact on Thanet roads whatsoever because drivers will simply stagger their journey times. So my question is, should any of the 450 households have school children, can the officer guarantee the child's safety, staying at school until midnight waiting to be picked up, in which in turn allows the roads to be less busy than at that time of night? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braywood. Also speaking as this time as Ward Councillor, Councillor Gregory.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Can you turn your okay now?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, right. The position is that the land promoters, Gladmans, wanted a hefty reduction in the number of affordable housing from 30% to 10%. They do this to make more of a profit when they sell the site with planning permission to developers. In an area of great deprivation, poor housing and homelessness, such as Thanet, no reduction should be acceptable. Moreover, affordable housing in these developments often refers to blocks of flats. The on-cost of these flats is staggering, with ground rent sometimes up to £4,000 a year, making a mockery of affordable. The local plan says outside of their urban areas, much of this land is high-quality, intensively farmed agriculture land and refers to the some areas which are at risk from flooding, and to contemplate building on land with a known flood risk as demonstrated all too well in the past week with the deluges will render any homes built on farmland completely unaffordable, unsellable and uninsurable. Insurance exclusions and insurance excesses are of great concern, and examples exist where poor planning decisions have impacted on homeowners who have had to live with the consequences of an unsaleable home in a flood risk area. Concrete cannot absorb excess water. The existing fields mitigate much of the risk that the flooding will become unmanageable if this land is concreted over. The water will cascade down while it renders the homes uninhabitable Water then makes its way onto Tivoli Brook. It will take rainwater from hard surfaces and general household surface waste. This water may well contain chemicals, nitrates and other pollutants to end up in Margate main sands via this outlet. It's named Tivoli Brook and it is a water course. With the new builds concentrated over farmland, the flooding cannot be mitigated. This pollution will have a disastrous effect on the economy. If the beach is out of use, visitors will go out elsewhere and Thanet's reputation will go with it. TDC cannot sacrifice the town's economy in this way. No development would be worth that. The flood risk cannot be addressed at a later stage after these houses are built. This will be irreversible. Flooding is a real threat to existing and potential homes. I would refer the committee to the decisions made by Dover Council's, Hertford Council's, Somerset and New Forest District Council's planning committees, who rejected a similar proposal from land promoter Gladman's over concerns of local flooding that their officers had recommended accepting. In the same way, TDC officers are advising TDC Planning Committee. Constituents have written to all of you and sent videos evidencing flooding at Shottendane. These are your constituents and it is their environment that will be decimated. You must act in the best interests of your constituents and reject this proposal. The 15% affordable offer, the objections of local residents, the 4,500 names on a petition, the high risk of flooding and uninsurable, unsellable, uninhabitable homes, the strain on local services, the impact on the environment, air quality, roads and the multitude of other valid reasons why this and similar builds should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gregory. Also speaking as Ward Councillor, Councillor Farrance.
Thank you, Chair. As Thanet District Councillors elected to represent our valued residents, I strongly urge you to reject this application. There are so many objections as raised at the meeting in April, but the paltry rise to 15% of affordable homes when TDC policy is at least 30% is totally unacceptable, as I think most of you agreed at that meeting in April. We all know Thanet is an area of significant deprivation, so the need for as many affordable homes as possible must be at the forefront of any planning application. Thanet has the second highest child poverty rates in the south of England and the highest in Kent. So it's clear that 30% affordable housing for any development in Thanet must be the absolute minimum. In addition, we actually have 5,517 empty homes in Thanet. What steps are being taken to bring these into use for our families in need, which would be preferable to building on our precious farmland? What about the continuing problem of too few GPs in Thanet? In April, I stated that at the Lyme surgery, which serves Samston Ward, there were approximately 5,000 patients per GP. This has now risen to around 6,000 patients per GP, whereas the national average is about 2,000 patients per GP. This begs the question, what is being done to recruit more GPs to Thanet? And I've been asking this question of both Kent and Medway Clinical Commissioning Group and TDC for some time, and I have no satisfactory answer. It's been pointed out that the planning applications may include the cost of a new surgery or an extension. But a building is no use to our residents when there are no GPs to care for them. The application must be refused until there is a clear plan from the CCG to recruit more GPs to Thanet. And what about our treasured and valuable wildlife? There's no mitigation for loss of farmland birds, which directly contravenes policy SP30. Residents know that skylarks nest in these fields every year and probably for hundreds of years. This application should be refused until a complete assessment of biodiversity on the site has been completed, including the breeding bird survey, which was promised in 2019, and proper mitigation measures have been put in place. Finally, there is concern that TDC could be taken to court for rejecting such applications, but there are many examples, as Councillor Gregory has mentioned, of councils refusing planning applications, often due to low levels of affordable housing. In 2018, Parkhurst developers took Islington Council to the High Court in a case centred around the viability assessment, and this was following 2 lengthy public inquiries. And this was because it did not meet the affordable housing requirement. Islington Council won, and their spokesperson said, "This landmark judgment reinforces what Islington and many other councils have been arguing for years, that affordable housing requirements cannot be bypassed by using the dark art of viability assessments to ignore planning policy requirements." Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clarence. Also speaking under Council Procedure 20.1, Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members and members of the public. I don't have too much to say, apart from I just find it is desperately disappointing that we are going against our own local plan. The council is working really, really hard to restore trust and transparency amongst the public, and I feel this is almost a kick in the face to the public to go against what they voted for. It's interesting that this report currently actually states the number of houses, if it were to be 15%, is 68. Now, I've been doing the maths and even checking it on a calculator. Even if it was raised to 30, that's 135. So if we look at the figures, if it was accepted, 68 just simply isn't good enough. 135, if it was accepted, which I hope it isn't, would be 135 family homes, making a bigger difference. The point I'm making is that if this is let through on just 15%, what happens when the next developer on an even larger development goes, "Oh, you know what, well, they got away with it, so I'm just going to go with 15% as well," because how little houses is that going to be? Is it going to be another 50? Is it going to be another 100? When actually we need much more than that. My Conservative colleague, Councillor Rees-Pugh, unfortunately was going to make it here, but can't be due to work commitments. I will read out his statements. He's much more eloquent than me, so I will try and channel his eloquence. Here he goes. As the committee will recall, I spoke on this application when it came before the planning committee some months ago and raised concerns about the flood risks of this site and the surrounding area, along with the insufficient proportion of affordable housing that was proposed at the time. Unfortunately, neither of these concerns have been addressed in this amended application. We've seen over the past week the impact that heavy rainfall has on Thanet, within Shottendane Road turning into a temporary river and Tivoli Brook suddenly reappearing above the surface. After the sewage leak, it's clear that Southern Water cannot cope with the number of homes in Thanet, let alone another 450. Therefore, without any improvements to the waste treatment plan in this application, it is completely unsuitable. The applicant has now come back with a revised proposal for affordable housing, an increase from 10% to 15%. This is still not policy compliant with, which is 30%. Thanet has long waiting list for affordable homes, and many residents are struggling to get on the housing ladder. This application does not provide sufficient affordable housing, and the infrastructure improvements included in the scheme should not be of a detriment of providing affordable housing. By accepting a reduction in affordable housing, we are kicking the can further down the road, and I doubt that another application will be able to make up the shortfall and provide more affordable housing than is policy compliant. We have thousands of homes that have been granted approval in Thanet that haven't yet been built. This is clearly not a demand for another 450 homes, but by granting this application permission, it will increase the risk of devastating the countryside along Shottendane Road. Therefore, I urge the committee to refuse permission for this scheme. Thank you. And that's all from both me and Rees.
Double act, Councillor Boyd. Thank you for that. I now will ask the planning officer to outline the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is an outline application for up to 450 dwellings with open space and road infrastructure. So the site is outlined in red. It's either side of the Shottendane Road. This is an aerial view of the site, so you can see here the two sections of land, the green section to the southeast of Shottendane Road, and then the section that's just to the north of Shottendane, which also fronts Hartsdown Road. So the site, as mentioned at the previous committee, is allocated in the local plan for up to 550 homes under policy SP21. So just a recap of the plans for the development. This is a topographical survey of the site. One of the issues that we talked about last time was about the change in topography of the land from area A on the image to area B on the image, and the change in land level of about 25 metres, which naturally causes an impact when it comes to actually developing the road through area A and area B. This is one of the things that we talked about at length, which is the surface water flooding on the site at the moment, which is made up from the model that was provided by Gladman as part of the application. What it shows is that there is existing surface water flows on the site, which comes from the southwest onto the site. So this has ended up dictating the layout of the development to try and accommodate and deal with the fact that there is these existing surface water drainage flows, which have informed then the proposed parameter plans for the development of the site. So this is the proposed parameter plan, just showing the development. So as mentioned, there is the road network changes that are being proposed. So a new roundabout on Shottendane Road with a new local distributor route to Hartsdown Road to the north, with then a new route down to a new mini roundabout on the Manston Road to the southeast. So that forms part of the Thanet inner circuit, which is under policy SP47. You can see there's open space throughout the site. The part to the very southern corner of the site has a hatched red line which shows the archaeological exclusion zone. You've then got in the centre of the site around the roundabout, you've got an area of open space there, and you can see the route of existing surface water drainage flows that we saw in the previous drawing running across that northern parcel of land. And I'll go on and show you the surface water drainage features that are being proposed as part of the development. So the darker yellow areas and the yellow areas, they show different sizes of properties. Because it's an outline application, we're not looking at the detailed layout, but this is just setting the parameters for the scheme. So the darker yellow areas, which are clustered at the lowest points of the site, are potentially properties up to 3-storey. The other areas are up to 2.5 storey, and then the sort of much lighter yellow is up to 2-storey development. All of those would be individually assessed within a reserved matters application, so the further detail would be submitted to the council for consideration. So that this is just the image just to confirm that, and you can actually see that there's a bit more of the legend there about the heights on this site, and again where that could be in terms of where the concentration of the higher dwellings are going to be. So this is the plan that's been provided showing the green and open space, and also the location of the equipped play areas on the site. So you have 2 locally equipped play areas that are proposed on the site, one in the main bit of open space on the northern section, and the other closer to the Manston Road. There are also local areas of play without equipment that are also being provided through the site. There is on the left-hand side of the image, there is a triangle of blue land, which is safeguarded land as part of Kent County Council's major road network bid. That land would be brought forward as part of the new road upgrades to Shottendane Road. So that land is being safeguarded, and there is a condition which would propose that nothing gets built on that with any reserve matters to ensure that potentially a link and realignment of the road can come forward. The SUDS feature that's being proposed is shown adjacent to the road. I'm just seeing if my mouse pointer comes in. It does, excellent. Which is in this area here, so just off Hartsdown Road. So this is linked to the surface water drainage strategy that's been put in, which has gone through assessment by KCC as the locally flood authority, which would provide a basin with a cubic capacity of 836. The aim here is to ensure that it not only reduces the runoff that's currently in situ, but the principle of the scheme is that it doesn't increase any runoff with the development of the site, so the site does not result in additional runoff to any of the surrounding watercourses, and that is something that is part of the planning conditions and has been signed off by KCC. In terms of This plan, it's just important to remind members of the fact there are listed buildings in close proximity to the site. So you have Shottendane Farm, which is the area that's surrounded by trees which are not within the site and are proposed to be all retained. And you've then got to the southeast, you've got a number of listed buildings and structures within the Margate Cemetery. And as I mentioned, that area of open space at the southeast corner is designed to ensure that it doesn't actually, there's no development that intrudes on the archaeology that's been found through the geophysical surveys that have been done. So that is to ensure that they are preserved in situ. Then just to confirm about the proposed phasing of the development, and this is important in terms of when the highway infrastructure would be coming online linked to the scheme. So phase 1A is in green, which will be the first part of the development that comes forward. The aim here is to ensure that the infrastructure which provides the link through from Hartsdown Road to Shottendane Road is in place to ensure that any dwellings that are occupied off that arm are served by the links then to avoid impact on Coffin House Corner. And obviously that's one of the main key issues with this site, is to provide the link through to ensure that you actually create a bypass around Coffin House Corner to bring the benefit that comes through the Thanet transport strategy. So members considered the application at the meeting on the 21st of April and raised various issues. The application was deferred to consider alternative provision of planning obligations with particular regard to affordable housing. Just to update members, since that last committee meeting we had 12 further objections submitted to us raising a number of the concerns that were already put in forward in the previous committee report, but it did include further points with regards to the council's interest in the land, flooding, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of a detailed breeding bird survey, and as I mentioned, some of the other issues that are already within the report when it was reported to you in April. So following the last meeting that we had in April, the applicant responding to some of the points that were raised and concerns that were articulated about the viability assessment being carried out in June last year, they looked at the updates for increased sales values using the nationwide house price index, and then also looked at the RICS building cost information service for to understand what the changes have been in terms of build costs in that time. It showed a 6% increase in sales values in the outer southeast and 3% build cost increase. So those increases were fed into the viability assessment that has already been independently assessed by the council's appointed viability consultants, who also did the full plan viability as well. And that has resulted in an increased amount of affordable housing that the applicant is putting forward that could be provided. That is on the basis of 80% of those properties being affordable rent and 20% of them being shared ownership. And as already mentioned, if the development was built out providing the 450 homes that this development could bring us as an up to, that equates to about 23 more dwellings above the previous 10%, to give a total of 68, of which 53 are affordable rent. Now, the report that you've got in front of you outlines the wording of the affordable housing policy that's already been mentioned, SP23 at 3.1, and it's just important that the end of that policy is also understood by members, that the requirements of the 30% target will only be reduced if meeting them would demonstrably make the proposed development unviable. As outlined in the previous committee report and in this report, this assessment, the viability assessment, has been reviewed by Dixon Searle, who did the council's full viability, and that confirms that it is the case that if more affordable housing was provided at the same split, that it would make the development unviable. Now, that is on the basis of the planning obligations that are outlined in the heads of terms at Annex 6. So that includes 4.9 million of contributions, which is split out to various different elements of KCC the contribution towards the CCG, as well as the contribution towards the Strategic Access Management and Monitoring Plan. Therefore, it is recommended by officers that the heads of terms with 15% affordable housing are accepted by members because it complies with policy SP23, but only with the review mechanisms that are outlined in those heads of terms, which would reassess viability before the occupation of the 200th dwelling on site and before the occupation of the 400th dwelling on site. Because as shown just by the last year, the increase in values can have a big impact on viability. So to put these review provisions in will allow that to be captured with a contribution coming to the council. There is one other review mechanism that's being proposed, and I did talk about this last time, and indeed James Raitt, when he was here, well not here, in the virtual meeting in April, talked about this, which is about the major road network funding stream that's available. And that could mean that the road network that you can see in front of you, part of those development costs could be taken up by the Department of Transport if the bid is successful for many road developments and improvements across Thanet. What this review mechanism that would be in the heads of terms would then require is that the money that would have been spent on roads comes back to the council and gets spent on planning obligations, including affordable housing. Now, the report picks up some of the other matters that were raised at the meeting last time at 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3 on the principal issues of developing the site. As I've mentioned at the last committee, the site is an allocated housing site. The question for members is about how it gets developed, not about whether or not it gets developed, because it is allocated. The response specifically to the points that have been raised about lack of GPs and attraction to GPs is dealt with in the report of 5.2, and also drainage specifically with regards to 5.3, which I've already covered when talking through the application. And I'm happy to answer any questions specifically about those issues, or indeed any other issues that members want some clarification on. So the application is recommended by officers to defer for approval, subject to securing a legal agreement for the provision of 50% affordable housing and contributions, and subject to the safeguarding conditions that are outlined in Annex 6. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Members, open this to yourselves. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I have found the level and tone of lobbying on this application intimidating. We are asked as members of the Planning Committee to come to meetings with no predetermination, and I fail to see how this kind of lobbying helps. I think we should be allowed to make our own decisions based on what we see and hear. Tonight I've listened carefully to what our speakers and officers have said. I think that this site has a lot in favour. As Mr Livingston pointed out, we should be looking at how the site is developed, not whether it should be developed. However, I would like to hear what other speakers have to say before I make my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. I'm looking for hands. Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Chairman, I'm troubled by this application, as are many others that we heard tonight, so I'd like to share my thoughts. Planning officers will tell us that we as councillors voted for the local plan and the allocated plots of lands in it. I must add that I didn't do that. But we also voted for all the policies within the local plan, and one of the fundamental policies is the minimum of 30% affordable homes. Here we are being asked to agree to half of that, which is just not acceptable. I appreciate the viability issues for the applicant. If they can't make it viable following our policies, then they should pass it to a developer who can, or if it's unviable, then so be it. But the affordable homes target is not just the only issue here with this development. The local plan is not just about building as many homes as possible. It's about future aspirations for our residents and building sustainable communities. Plonking 450 homes in a field with what could be around 1,500 people is certainly not sustainable. There's a GP shortage in Thanet, and that's at crisis point. The residents of this development, as we've heard already, will be in the catchment area already at bursting point. We could also see 400 or 500 children on this development. Has anybody checked if there are sufficient school places? I'm presuming not. And please don't even get me started on dental services in Thanet. Personally, I'd like to see a moratorium on all decisions on all these mass developments coming down the track, including this one, until CCGs can guarantee healthcare for all our residents and for all the newcomers that will occupy these houses, and guarantees from KCC that there will be school places within walking distance. I appreciate there are penalties if this is refused this evening and later granted on appeal, but this should not be a reason for accepting this application, and committee members should not be fearful. We also listened to the KCC representative at the previous meeting stating that this development is necessary so as to fund the last link of the planned relief bypass ring road. These are roads that KCC should be funding themselves and should have been built years ago. But now we want to burden our area with houses built on grade 1 agricultural land so we can get a few roundabouts and roads. I can't support this application this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Mr Livingston wishes just to come back.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the point with regards to school places. It's covered in the committee report that KCC obviously provide us a consultative response specifically looking at the requirement for new school places as part of any housing development over 10 houses. So that is covered as one of the contributions that would come forward as part of the development, which is obviously the way that increases in schools are funded. I just wanted to again reiterate the point that I raised earlier about the site in itself is allocated in the local plan. So in terms of the principle of developing this site, I cannot see that there is a cogent reason for refusal for members on the principal issue of developing the site because it is an adopted site in the local plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. We all know about this, and we're going to have more of these. So, I mean, this is not just a one-off decision. This will impact upon other decisions we make in the council regarding local plans and adopted land and where houses are going to be built. I do have issues. A couple of them are the flood issues. I mean, I've seen Shottendane Road absolutely flooded. I can't see how building another 1,500 houses on an area that regularly floods is going to be of benefit. Southern Water, as we all know, had a sewage break. That has affected the whole community as well as further flung. People want to come on holiday, etc. If they can't cope with the number of houses now, how are they going to cope with another 1,500 here or wherever they're going to be built? And my third one is, realistically, we did agree as a council and as a group within the whole of Thanet that we would have 30% affordable housing. That has to be achieved. We had one came in the other week where L&G said we can do this. If they can do it, then I'm sure other companies can do it. They just don't want to do it. And I think that just needs to be addressed. And I think we need to make sure that we stand firm on the 30%. Whether that means that this company cannot make it viable doesn't mean to say another company cannot. And I think that has to be borne in mind. I'm not against, and I'm not trying to go against local plan, you know, we need to build houses, I understand that. But I do think we need to build it in a way that is going to help everybody in the community, not just the people who can afford to buy a house. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I will hand back to Mr Livingston.
I just think it's just important in terms of differences with other sites. Obviously what we talked about in the last meeting in April is specifically with regards to this site and the challenge for this site in terms of viability, which predominantly comes from the infrastructure requirements of having roads that are built to both local distributor standard but also 2 roundabouts being built on a land which has a level change of over 25 metres, which has an engineering cost. And these are some of the detailed costs that were looked at in a QS survey, again, separately, independently looked at to ensure those costs were sound within the viability assessment. In terms of the example of the Westwood Lodge site and providing 30% on that, there is no infrastructure requirements on that site at all for 150 dwellings because of where it's located, and it's obviously in a different value area for where it is. So it is just important that those distinctions are made when coming to this decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. Our local plan says 30% affordable housing because that's what we need, and in particular we need family homes. Of the last or first proposal, the affordable housing was allocated mainly as flats, and I don't see anywhere on the second proposal that it actually states what the mix of housing would be, but it's family homes that we need. The reduction, obviously half from 135 to 68, is significant. I understand the viability issues, but the fact is, for all our big developments, it is bound to create a road infrastructure cost, and therefore we are always going to come up against this problem of viability. In a previous proposal, not for this site, for a different site, we agreed a reduced rate of affordable housing, and we were told very clearly at the time that that would not set a precedent, but it seems to me every large development that comes before us does reduce the amount of affordable housing, and I find that unacceptable. Thank you.
Councillor, I nearly called you Councillor again. Ian, please.
Just on the mix of housing, so the mix of housing isn't fixed within the outline application. In terms of the affordable housing as part of a proportion of that mix, the adopted mix that they've taken in the viability assessment is the mix that's in the local plan in terms of the amount of flats. So they've mimicked exactly the market housing as if it was the affordable housing. So in terms of a high proportion of flats, that is simply that way. It's not the case when it comes to actually looking at, again, the market housing in comparison to the affordable housing. So it's the same mix.
Thank you, Ian. Just a point of information for me before I come back to members, and I have got some names down. It was noted after we discussed this application the last time round that myself as chair, I won't use the exact wording which appeared on social media, but basically said a few things that I turned to the planning officer on numerous occasions, and I wonder why that is. The reason I turn to the planning officers, as we have legal here tonight, is to make sure that things are said correctly and right. They have everything at their fingertips. Us as members, we have reports. I just wanted to get that over, that I'm not in Mr. Livingston's back pocket, and I think everybody knows what I'm talking about there. And I've just taken advice whether I'm allowed to say that, which I am. So that's why I turn to the officers for their advice, and I think members know that, but there are members of the public here and I want them to know that as well. Thank you. Councillor Hopkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to firstly say thanks to all the members of the public that have submitted comments on this, including members of the public in the gallery at the moment, and also I just wanted in particular to mention the Save Our Fields film, which we were all sent. I note by contrast that Gladmans have not sent a representative tonight to speak for their proposal. I just wanted to pick out one particular issue which has been spoken about a lot, which is the failure to meet the 30% provision of affordable housing, which I agree with a lot of people, a lot of views that have been expressed tonight. It's so important that we are doing everything we can to meet that figure, and that developers are aware that we're a council that wants that figure to be met. And on that point, I mean, so we're advised that that figure isn't viable with this proposal. The report says that Gladman's estimate, their own projection, is that they'll make £19.8 million profit from the proposal as they see it, unless I'm misunderstanding the figures. So if that's the case, I do struggle to see, the issue of viability there. I mean, perhaps it's to do with percentages of margins, etc., but close to £20 million profit seems to be a comfortable margin. So I do struggle to understand why we should accept a proposal that doesn't meet what we as a council, I think, consider to be a very, very important figure for the residents of Thanet in terms of affordable housing. I think I wasn't present at the previous planning meeting where this proposal, the initial version of this proposal was discussed. But I understand that at that point the offer was for 10% affordable housing, and I believe we were advised that, or the committee was advised at the time that, that on the grounds of it not being viable to go above that it should be accepted. So it makes me feel, I'm wondering how can we get to being confident that this 15% actually now really is a figure that actually can't be extended if we were advised that the 10% figure was previously something that couldn't be reached. A point's been made about, we in principle in the local plan have allocated this land for development, so I accept that point. But there is, as we keep mentioning this 30%, that is another principle in the local plan, so it doesn't seem to me to be, necessary that we have to contradict one aspect of the local plan for the other one. So I have these serious concerns about the 30% allocation, the failure to meet it.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkinson. Mr. Lewison, coming back on that.
You're correct, Councillor Hopkinson. It's about margins. So the total amount is based on a percentage of gross development value for developer profit, which is the government set out in the National Planning Practice Guidance that for viability assessments that you can look at a range of 15% to 20% gross development value. In this instance, the appraisal takes 17.5%, so it goes down the middle, and that was the approach that's been taken on a number of other viability assessments that the council looks at. Just to come back on the point with regards to, I think you mentioned about representation. Obviously, there's no public speaking at the meeting because it's an agenda item, so that's the point with regards to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Aaron. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm like Councillor Hopkinson. I was, like a number of us, at the meeting when we discussed this 2 committees ago, I think it was. And I know 7 of us voted to reject the application at that. I raised, along with others, a number of issues around biodiversity, or the lack of some of the biodiversity surveys. One's been mentioned, the breeding bird survey, which we found was missing. I haven't been satisfied that as we've seen last week, that this land is suitable in terms of flooding. We've seen the floods up that road just the last week, and I don't see how this land can be suitable based on that. The CCG contribution, okay, I understand that might have been accepted, but various people have made the point this evening that that it's not just bricks and mortar that we need, and we really need to find a solution to be able to attract the medical professionals to the area who are going to actually staff those bricks and mortar buildings that would get built maybe as a result of this application. And Councillor Hopkinson makes an excellent point about the cost versus profit that's highlighted in Annex 7, the appraisal summary. It does. I find it difficult to accept that 20 million profit off of this proposal isn't enough to provide 30% housing. I assume that the 4.9 million contributions for Section 106 and others come from that profit. But even so, I find it very difficult to accept that there's still a cut by half in the amount of affordable housing that should be allocated here. I remember Councillor Keane mentioned a previous application that came before us where we got an appraisal summary, and after much discussion, I'd say even heartache amongst some of us, we were persuaded to accept a cut, I think it was to 18%, most of us with a heavy heart, and I believe I certainly felt that that was the one time that I could do that, and I find it very, very, very difficult to accept any proposal now, any application that offers anything less than 30% affordable housing when it's something that is desperately needed in the district. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Bring back Mr. Livingston.
Apologies, members, I haven't covered the breeding birds issue, and that is something that I think is important to cover. So the application was accompanied by an environmental statement under the EIA regs, which included a phase 1 habitat survey that was carried out. This was looked at by KCC biodiversity officers and Natural England as part of the statutory consultation that we carry out. A specific breeding bird survey wasn't asked for by KCC biodiversity following their assessment of the information that was submitted, but obviously it was looked at in the round by Natural England when considering the Council's habitat regulations assessment, which is one of the annexes in your report. And what that outlines, and is outlined within the environmental statement, is sufficient mitigation to ensure that there will not be a significantly adverse impact on breeding birds on the site. And that's enshrined in two particular planning conditions, condition 31 and condition 41. 31 is an ecological design strategy which will actually ensure that there is sufficient mitigation for the protected species that are identified within the environmental statement. And 41 is further mitigation, which is actually in the form of a homeowner pack, which will have to come forward with any new dwelling that's constructed, which is basically outlining how what residents can do to avoid impacting on any species that are being accommodated on the site, which is a scheme that's been obviously provided for in this instance. Natural England have agreed the habitat regulations assessment and have confirmed therefore that on that side of things that they don't consider that the impact is not mitigated sufficiently, and therefore we do think that issue has been sufficiently dealt with through both the conditions and in consultation with Natural England and KCC Biodiversity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Do I see any other members? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid brevity isn't my strongest point, but I promise I do try my best. And so for brevity, I'll speak only on the issue that's particularly close to my heart, namely affordable housing and SP23. Affordable housing is the cornerstone of progress for Thanet. We are in desperate need of affordable housing, and it isn't just our area that's struggling. There are many areas that currently struggle with what is considered to be low land value, and Thanet is one of them. What we see as a result of this is a continuing struggle to provide affordable housing, as we are not funded in that sense by central government to do so at the level required, and have to rely on private development to deliver levels anywhere near our actual need. We are in effect forced by central government and central legislation to rely on private development to help deliver essential infrastructure and services and sufficient affordable housing. The problem being that private developers are not required to consider residents' needs and councils' needs above the overall picture in terms of financial viability. I've been in several planning meetings now where the issue of proportion in terms of affordable housing has arisen. Each time I've become more and more frustrated and more angry at the strictures of central legislation and systems that insist that councils have control, whilst knowing full well that ultimate control in terms of funding, reliance on private development and the ability of councils to provide infrastructure lies centrally. In the current system, where we are not given sufficient central funding to build social and affordable housing sufficient for our need, and are therefore required to rely on private development to deliver it, the 30% delivery of affordable housing under SP23 is vitally important. Just as important is the type of housing delivered. Thanet desperately needs affordable rent, but currently financial viability determines even the delivery of that. As of the types of affordable housing, affordable rent is the least profitable. I have a fundamental issue with this, and it's why I struggle with any system that combines profit with care or essential service. Because when situations like this arise, the two are incompatible. Right now, we are effectively held over a barrel. Those of us who have worked with housing know just how difficult the situation is. We have to provide affordable housing. We are not given sufficient central funding to do so on our own. And so time and time again, we are faced with the dilemma of financial viability issues, told that we need to accept 10 or 15% rather than the required 30, or residents will go without. And we are left with that choice. To provide for some, even though it's nowhere near the amount sufficient to deal with our need, or to reject and accept that those families will remain in need for the immediate future, and hope that either the development changes, or that another comes in its place that fulfills our needs as an area. I wrote to Robert Jenrick MP last month to add my voice to the numbers of councils expressing just this problem. As I have not had a reply as yet, my concerns still stand. Central legislation requires us to have a local plan. It requires us to adhere to planning algorithms. It requires us to rely on private development to deliver essential housing and services, because in spite of our knowledge of our area and our needs as a council, we are not given the direct funding to build ourselves. And when we are faced yet again with those circumstances forcing us to accept or reject a drop in our essential affordable housing requirement, we are forced to choose between providing for some or providing for none, when we should be able to provide for all. If affordable housing is an afterthought and unaffordable, then central government needs to step up and address those funding gaps. If councils cannot afford essential infrastructure and services, even after relying on private development, then central government needs to address that. We are here to decide on individual planning cases, but it is impossible to do so effectively without considering the larger picture when issues like this continually come to the surface, and we are doing the system as a whole a disservice when we do not speak on these issues, and we do our community a disservice in not explaining the complexities and difficulties of these systems. Planning does not exist in isolation. It exists as a function of central government, delegated to local councils, who then struggle to explain just how thoroughly their hands are tied, even within that delegated authority. We are here as a council to provide. We should be able to do that ourselves, as we have the local knowledge and understanding to build well and sympathetically. But if we cannot, and we have to rely on private development to deliver what is needed, then what is needed has to be the main priority, and central government has to support us in the delivery of essential services to our communities. And if recognition of that has to begin in council chambers across the country, then that is what will happen. In Thanet, we face some of the most difficult social and financial challenges in the UK every single day. We have done for all of my lifetime. But we do so because as an area we accept that our lives are intrinsically linked with those of others. Regardless of how difficult it is, we do not step away and we serve our community. As a community, we do not accept that we can provide for no one. We do not accept that we can only provide for some. We provide for all. And although I acknowledge the review measures and the efforts of planning, to my mind, if SP23 is to function for this area, it has to function to its capacity, and that requires all levels of government, including this committee, looking at how planning functions for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Moore, Pat Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. We've talked a lot about houses, which we do desperately need. We also need food. To sell land to build houses on is a bit of a funny thing when we're going to lose land that feeds us. They're actually growing food on it. They're going to feed us, so what will we do when it's gone? We've come out of Europe, so we're having to find new trade agreements. It's not going to be cheaper than it was before, so food is going to be more expensive. And I think there are a lot of hungry people going to be knocking about. I think we could build houses somewhere else, but I thought we'd stop building on green land. Obviously not. So we need houses, but we need food. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Do you wish to? No, fine. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Whatever members may feel, this site has been allocated for housing, and for that reason I am very concerned that if this application is lost, it will be overturned on appeal. And I think that this is a cost that this council cannot afford. For that reason, I wonder, Mrs Livingstone, do you feel there is any way that the amount of affordable housing may be increased? It's the one issue that I personally am still concerned about.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. The debate is very similar to the discussions that we've had before, members, about Salmston Grange, which was the site that's been referenced. In terms of the evidence that's been presented by the applicant, which has then been, as I say, assessed and looked into, obviously what that is based on is 80% of those affordable units being affordable rent, 20% of them being shared ownership. One of the things that we also looked at was to see whether or not the increase of, there could be an increased proportion of affordable housing from looking at the government's recently announced first homes, which is something that some of you will be aware of and will form part of separate training. But it wouldn't do that. The way that you would increase the proportion of affordable housing on the basis of the evidence that's been presented is twofold. One is you reduce the amount of affordable rent, which is obviously not something that the council as officers would support because it goes against our housing strategy. That could potentially increase obviously the value of the affordable housing to then increase the overall proportion of affordable housing. The other scenario is the one that's presented in the report to members, which is that effectively councillors could decide that they would minimise the contributions that would go to KCC and the NHS and to reduce that the overall amount that would then potentially increase it. But the scenario that's been put forward, which we've checked, would basically be that if you reduce that amount of contributions by 75%, you only increase the amount of affordable housing up to 19%. So you don't necessarily get a lot of benefit on the financial side of things. In terms of members' concerns about the issues with affordable housing, it is obviously the case that everyone is absolutely correct. The target is 30%. That is what we want to achieve. The policy has the very specific line at the end and the reason why that line's in there is because that is what the government state should be the case, that we should look at when sites are not viable because of particular reasons. And development still should be provided for other reasons, that we should look at which requirements are needed, and if the development will be unviable because of it, but it also provides other benefits, then planning inspectors and, as shown in appeals, will drop down and agree less affordable housing or less contributions because they would consider that the benefits outweigh. And I appreciate that, therefore, it's a very difficult decision for members to agree a reduction to 15%. But fundamentally, the site has quite tangible, clear benefits that will be weighed quite heavily in support. Obviously, the council at the moment cannot meet the housing delivery test. Which means that we are in a presumption state, which can result in applications coming in outside of our urban confines, and great weight is given, or is stated by the government to be given, to the provision of housing in those sites. So for an allocated site to come forward is something that we would obviously look to support. In this instance, obviously, it's bringing forward key infrastructure, and it is also making a provision of affordable housing, but that is not the target. But they have demonstrated, and obviously the information has been provided to members about this. That viability information is there in the pack that shows that they have demonstrated it would be unviable if you increase the amount. To one of the points that's been mentioned, which is effectively how can you trust officers if we've said 10% is okay and now suddenly 15%. I do think it's important to touch on this. Values will change over time. That is inevitable in a market. That is exactly why we've proposed the review mechanisms, so that if members had accepted the 10%, and then when they build out the scheme and they get to the 200th dwelling, we rerun all the viability using the same inputs as we do, but with actual costs and actual sales values, we would get a proportion of that surplus to go back into affordable housing. That's the point of the legal agreement. That's the point of why we need that sort of obligation. So it is captured either way in terms of the value and the uplift to the site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that, Councillor Beauford. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. I understand most of what's going on this planning issue. I'm just a bit concerned or confused still with regards to what Ian said about if the road is then funded by Kent, that we get a wedge of money. Will that money be spent on affordable housing on that site is question one. And question two, I might have missed it in the report, sorry. Question two is, if that wedge of money comes to us, I don't know how much it is, I've got no idea how much a road costs to build, would that not be better that the builder puts that into affordable housing so we actually achieve the 30%? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Ian.
So the mechanism is that, if KCC's bid is successful with the Department of Transport, the money that would have been spent on particular roads within this development, which form part of that bid, would basically be funded with some match funding by the developer. So it's not entirely all of the costs of the road that would be provided by the DFT. There has to be some funding from a developer to match fund to an extent of a percentage. It is in the report, the Annex 6 report, the total savings could total 3.6 million minus the match funding, of which the match funding amount hasn't been fixed yet by KCC. But the proportion of that would be around that sort of total. That is specifically being earmarked for three things: affordable housing, and the contributions towards the KCC contributions, which from the report you'll see there is currently a sort of tariff capped amount of KCC contributions, so it could increase that up to the request that's been made. So it's those two things that it would come to. In terms of your point about whether or not it could be on site, it's proposed because of when the funding would actually come forward, it's likely to come forward later on because of the way that the funding works, that it's not expected for a decision until potentially, it might even be 2023. And obviously, depending on how the development goes on, it would be a contribution which would then be fixed for affordable housing projects in potentially Margate, or depending on on the area that would actually be able to be, the money would be used for by our housing team. So it would be an off-site contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, I don't see any other speakers. So members, I think a very good debate once again. And it's over to you, if I may. So I will now put the motion of the officer's recommendation, which is to defer for approval to yourselves. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? I'm going to abstain. So that motion has been lost. So if you can bear with me a few moments, members and members of the public, I'll just come to Mr. Livingston. Yes.
So members, obviously I mentioned a number of points. Obviously the issues that are raised in the report clearly identify about needing to have cogent reasons for refusal for an application. And obviously the main issue that has obviously come back is that this hasn't met the 30% target with regards to affordable housing. That's obviously the main sort of dominating issue that's been raised. Obviously at the moment we have no evidence to say that the evidence that's been produced by the applicant and also been independently checked by our consultants is incorrect. So it does leave us in a position where a refusal on that ground on its own would need to be justified against the evidence to some extent that we've obviously been provided. Now, I obviously mentioned with regards to certain issues such as profit levels, for example, where there is a range of inputs that could be put forward. Obviously, my recommendation would always be to ensure that the council has a robust reason for refusal. And obviously, in this instance, I don't believe members are saying they don't agree with Dixon Searle's work that they've done on both this sort of full plan viability, but it's that effectively you would. But I mean, what I would suggest in this instance is actually getting a second opinion if you wanted. But it is entirely up to you. If members consider that they would want to refuse the application as being contrary to SP23, then a member could move that motion. It does not give officers much ground, though, to argue that at appeal, because we have no evidence to suggest that what's been confirmed by our viability consultants is incorrect. So I open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Yeah, what about, I mean, you said you based it on 17.5%. So what about if that was reduced to 15%, which is the lower limit of accepted viability? Does that make enough difference?
I don't know what that does to the scenario in terms of if you fed that into an appraisal done by an appointed consultant. I don't know what that would do in terms of improvements to viability. So that's one, obviously that's one factor. It may be that it doesn't increase it to 30%, and all the other inputs, which obviously have already been independently checked, would still then stay the same. I think the normal procedure potentially would be, and this is enshrined in the protocol, is that if obviously members want to refuse the application on this basis, that there is a lack of affordable housing, that effectively we outline in a report to you what that reason for refusal looks like, and we would try and put together a case to see if it would hold and stand together. Obviously, we have looked at this issue already. You know, that is what obviously the report that's before you tonight looks at. But if members wish to refuse it on the basis of the evidence that they have before them, they can do that. But the report obviously does make it clear about the risk that that does pose. So.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Councillor Keane. Members, Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there was a couple of points. It's not only affordable housing, which seems to be the main bugbear of all of us councillors that are here tonight, and I think that's a fair and justified reason for refusal. But also there's the issue we have with flooding. There's the issues we have with, as other councillors said, you know, there's no dental practices. There's no. I know, Ian, that you pick on that, but it's the overall scope that this is involving. It's not just the fact that it's not affordable housing. It's the fact that whether this is right for this area, because that road floods all the time. And I think that this is all part and parcel of the same thing. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can put me in the right direction. But if this goes to appeal, the worst thing that can happen, surely, is that it gets agreed by the appeal body and it sits as it is now. So it's a no-lose situation for the council, effectively. It can't get any worse than it is now. Or am I wrong? And if so, please put me right. Because, you know, if it means that if it goes to appeal and we only get 10% affordable housing, that becomes an issue for us as members to consider. But if it goes to appeal and they lose, then it's a win situation. But if it comes back as exactly the same, we've lost nothing by going to appeal.
Just to pick up one point about flooding, obviously we are guided by the expert advice we get from KCC as the local lead flood authority. They have agreed the strategy for surface water drainage on this site. The provisions that have been put forward to reduce the rate of flows as a result of the housing development have been considered acceptable. The condition that would mitigate this is the way you deal with flooding in planning. Effectively, if you agree the strategy, then you get the detailed scheme in when the layout is fixed. You ensure that you've got all of the various mitigation measures in place. So from the officer perspective, I don't consider there to be a cogent reason for refusal on flooding, because it would be on the basis. I appreciate the site floods, because we've seen it with the surface water drainage flows, but it's an anecdotal suggestion that actually isn't backed up by evidence that this development would result in flooding. We don't have any evidence of that. That's the one of the key issues. In terms of going to appeal, the point of the role of planning committees is obviously to make the planning decisions on matters such as this, but we must we can only advise you about how to make the cogent decisions based on planning considerations. If an application goes to appeal and is overturned, obviously yes, that would grant consent for what has been refused. What that would obviously result in is costs to the council from dealing with that appeal, from administration costs to costs, again, if it goes to a hearing or public inquiry, that's a cost of a barrister, etc. All of those elements come into play, but fundamentally the costs regime is the issue. If the council refuses an application on unreasonable grounds without any evidence, that's a costs award where we pay for the other side's cost as well. Now, I accept the fact that in terms of the planning judgment, that doesn't come into play. It's not about avoiding costs in terms of the judgment we make. It's actually about the actual judgment, the decision needs to be based on planning reasons. And that's why I will always suggest that if members want to refuse something, there's got to be some evidence behind it. There's got to be something to back up that claim. Now, in this instance, affordable housing being the issue that's come up particularly, we have obviously looked at the viability assessment and have agreed that, but if members do think that they consider that more affordable housing should or could be provided on the basis that you've read the information that's been provided, then that is a case that we can look into and try and support an appeal as best as we can. But fundamentally, it is a decision for members to make on the basis of the information that we've presented to you.
Thank you, Ian.
Sorry, if I can come back on that, Chair. Sorry, that doesn't really answer the question, Ian. What I asked you was that as an officer, as the planning officer, if we go, we stick with our decision as it is now, okay, and it goes to appeal, will that put us in a worse situation? Ignore the finances. I'm talking whether the decision would he put in an appeal for 15%, or will he get 5%, or what will the decision? I'm not saying you can prejudge the decision, but you know what I mean. We can't be in a worse position, or we could be.
Sorry, just because I slipped into my longer point, so apologies. The applicant has submitted it on the basis of 15%. And on the basis of the heads of terms that are there. So that is what members are considering. That is the planning application that we're considering, and that would be what's then, if your members decide to refuse the application, that is then what is appealed. We would be working on the basis that that is what the applicant is proposing, and that is then what's proposed to the inspector, and the inspector would then determine it on the basis of that provision. An inspector wouldn't arbitrarily reduce that in making their decision, because that would be the applicant's submission to them, so that would be what they would be considering.
Thank you. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, this application has been before us twice. We've had reports, a lot of the same reports, but we've had copious reports on this with a lot of evidence that we've listened to. We've read the reports. We've listened to the officers' statements on this, and we've had our concerns, and we've rejected what has been proposed as a committee. And so I think I would propose that we don't keep going backwards and forwards looking for new, different ways of solutions. We've quite categorically rejected this proposal on the grounds of affordable housing, one of them, but also we have rejected this we've rejected the evidence around the liability to flooding, and we've rejected the evidence that we've got around adequate health cover the CCG contribution, we've as a committee have said that it's inadequate. So I think we've spoken quite clearly that we don't accept this application, and I propose that we should reject it along those grounds.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. I'm going to go to Ms Livingston just to finalise. I do understand myself where you're coming from here, but with the flooding, as it's been mentioned, and this is me, you know, I'm looking at the whole thing again, and understand what you're getting at, but with the flooding side, until there's nothing there at the moment to say that's going to have a, you know, adverse effect, if I make sense, because we don't know. We don't know. Ian.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. Thanks. No, it's, just on the CCG point, I appreciate the perspective that obviously this is a concern that's come up. The CCG have requested a contribution. I understand that there is concern about the lack of GPs in the area. The report that we've put forward makes it very clear that that is not as a direct result of this development. Again, it would, in our view, and that's all that I can provide to members, it would be unreasonable to refuse it on those grounds. There's no policy to hinge that on, and fundamentally the decision has to be based on the development plan policies. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Keane.
Just to come back to Ian's point, does it not state in the local plan something about making sure that the health needs of the community are met?
It does, and that's why we asked the CCG for their view, and they've agreed the mitigation that's been requested. So again, there's no reason there.
You're right. Councillor Wright.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to go back on to the issue about the 30%. This is not the first application that we've had where I feel that we're being held to ransom over the affordable housing. Is there any way, Mr. Livingston, that we can make it clear to any developer that's going to come into the area 30% is the requirement in Thanet, and that's what it is not negotiable? Thank you.
Yeah.
The local plan policy SP23 specifically cites that if a development will be unviable, that's the only reason why we would reduce the 30%. So it states that in the policy it's the adopted policy. So that makes it clear, again linked to government guidance on this exact point, that we must consider the viability case that's put forward. I think just as another point, if you know, the reason for refusal for members on this, on affordable housing, is straightforward in its wording, which is that the development would fail to provide 30% affordable housing as on the site, contrary to SP23. But you know, again, that reason would be you know, would have to effectively bypass the evidence in front of you, and that is, you know, that's the officer view, but it's for members to decide.
Members, I did say earlier on we have our chief solicitor with us tonight, Estelle. We'd like to say just a few words and clarify a few things. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the point has been very well made by Ian, but you do have to be very careful to think about this evidence base, because the point on affordability, and we absolutely understand the concerns, is that the applicant has put forward their expert report on viability, but we have got an expert independent assessment of that viability. So that is our evidence. So what Ian is saying is that, you know, in order to negate that evidence, we have to go somewhere else. So it's not enough simply to say, well, we don't accept the evidence on viability. we as a council have already got an independent assessment that the viability assessment is correct, and that's the difficulty. So just to reiterate that point.
Thank you, Estelle. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. So, I mean, going back then, do we need to put forward that we think a lower percentage profit would, should be employed in this thing, because what we need is affordable housing for the area. So doing the 15% figure rather than the 17.5% figure.
Ian.
Thanks. I mean, as I said, the issue is that the reduction of the profit amount wouldn't necessarily equate to achieving 30% because of the issues on this site, particularly with regards to the abnormal costs of road infrastructure and topography. In terms of a refusal on the grounds of being contrary to SP23, then indeed that sort of issue would be part of the council's case to say, well, we think that should be reduced on that basis. But the issue is whether or not, again, we would look to try and potentially come back to you with a case which looks at that and looks at any other issues that we can find that we can argue to put it to members, or alternatively we would look to try and put that forward after the event. But the problem is that's not what members are, that's not actually what members are considering now. You're considering the evidence before you, and that makes it clear that the evidence that we've got is effectively agreeing with the applicant's evidence. So,
if members and public would mind, obviously, come back. Obviously, we do totally understand, and I do as well as chair, what is being said here tonight, and it's got to be done. I think you all know it's got to be done correctly.
Thanks. So just in terms of the conversation just had, as alluded to earlier, the recommendation for officers would be effectively to defer to actually get the reasons, a reason for refusal, looking through the viability assessment and potentially getting an additional opinion on the viability to see whether or not we can back up the members' wish and thought that actually more affordable housing can be provided. So that would be our recommendation to members.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Keane, come in first.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of add that also maybe what we need to be looking at is ways to reduce or find other funding for the infrastructure needs. I know you've said about the possibility of the road thing, but can that not be firmed up beforehand?
No, we're beholden to the Department of Transport, unfortunately, with regards to whether or not that funding is going to be agreed or not. So, unfortunately not.
Councillor Garner.
Just a brief comment. We have a requirement for 30% in our local plan as what we would ideally like. My feeling on the offers of 10% is that it's actually so low it was offensive, and 15% is still derisory. And that, I just put that out as a comment.
Thank you for that. Councillor Garner, did you want to come?
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I saw Councillor Whitehead wanted to speak as well, but I mean, I'll come back to the point that I made. I mean, with all due respect to everybody who's spoken, we've debated this twice, long and hard. We've listened to all the evidence, and we've rejected it. And so, you know, we've said no to this application, and so we should. I think we could go away and try and get it up to 18%, or try and persuade us again around some of the evidence. But we've said no. So I think that we need to stick to what we've said. We reject it.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Before I bring Councillor Whitehead in, bring our solicitor Estelle back in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Garner. We absolutely understand what you're saying and what the committee is saying. The problem is, in planning terms, and when you go to appeal, it's not enough to say no. And it's not enough to say no faced with our own evidence that supports the evidence on viability presented by the applicant. So all Ian is suggesting, I think, is that perhaps we have, and you know, this has happened before, I think, here and other councils as well, where we've you know, got this situation, is that we have a short deferral for us to present back to you some cogent reasons for refusal that could then back up your decision to say no. So that's simply what Ian is recommending. So we absolutely understand that you're saying no, but it's not enough just to say no. We have to have some good evidenced reasons for that.
Thank you for that, Estelle. I'll bring in Councillor Whitehead, and then I think I will draw a line, because I think there are obviously officers here, as I said earlier on, are making sense, and I think most of us, all of us, have had training for planning. And again, I totally understand, I keep saying this about members of the public and their feelings, and yes I do, I don't need laughter, thank you. And there is a process, as being said, that we have to follow, otherwise the whole thing will come back, whether we like something or not. I've seen it over the years being on planning, and I know other members have as well. So I totally appreciate the input we're all having tonight, because it is a difficult one. We must, this council must get it right. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I think the problem is that it becomes very circular, and going back to the wider perspective issue, we have to rely on central legislation in order to make our secondary legislation and our plans. And so we do that. The problem that we have is that central legislation often doesn't suit us as an area. It doesn't fit what we need. And then we're faced with a circumstance where we are fully aware within our roles that we have to evidence our decisions. We're fully aware that we have to be very, very conscious of each ground that we're looking at. But the problem is that the central legislation that we're working from doesn't allow us to reflect the needs of our area. And so then councils such as ours, which have significant issues in terms of finance and in terms of land value, where we already have significantly deprived demographics, we're effectively asked to use legislation that we don't think fits in order to make decisions that affect our community. And I extend that to everyone within the council. I have the utmost respect for planning, and I have the utmost respect for officers and councillors, but we are all put in exceptionally difficult situations by this arrangement. And then we're faced with the choice of sending an application back that we know will have significant financial repercussions for the council. It isn't that we're unaware of it, we are aware of that. And it's something that I've spoken of before when we've had to accept reduced percentages in terms of affordability. But there comes a point where we have to say that something within this system doesn't work. And even if it's nothing that we can actively change at a council level, it has to be recorded externally eventually by the many councils who are bringing up the same issues within committees throughout the country, that we are not being served by our central planning framework. And it's cases like this that make it ever clearer that there needs to be a level of local input and understanding to make developments viable. And I don't like being in this position, and I don't like saying this, because I know how hard officers work, and I know how hard planning works, and I know how difficult it is for councillors to decide on these things, and I know how difficult it is to hear a lot of these things for members of the public. but we do have to start understanding why things aren't adding up and why things aren't working. And sometimes that does mean that you just have to say it doesn't work anymore. And at the moment it doesn't work because it doesn't work for Thanet. Sorry.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Whitehead. And again, I'm saying this, I totally understand what you're getting at. We have a very difficult situation, but it's not just Thanet. I know Thanet has some very important parts to play in things, and deprivation and so on, fully aware. And if we could have changed it all tomorrow, I know we all would, but as you know full well, it doesn't work that way. I think listening to everybody here, that it has been mentioned that this comes back, and I'm sure I'll be told wrong, but we've heard what you've said tonight, officers have heard, I've heard, to see if anything can be spoken about, and I'm sure Ian will tell me wrong. I'm saying this because of the housing, you know, the 15% which you all have concerns with, about the site. I think again we must remember also, we haven't got them in front of us yet, but we're going to have some very, very difficult decisions on this planning committee in the next 2-3 years, because as you're all aware, there are some very big sites proposed, although we haven't got them yet. I'm not saying it's something to look forward to. Again, we do take it, all of us, very seriously what's going on. But I think if we can bring this back and see if officers can come back in with, if I make sense, members, I don't think we've had, in all my years and other people's years, something quite like this before. But we are listening to you. So
it would be to, the recommendation from officers would be to defer it, to bring it back with reasons for refusal on lack of affordable housing. That would be the recommendation at this point.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. That is, I know it's come from the officer, but I think we're all working together here, as I said earlier on. Could I have a proposer, please, for the...
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to propose that officers come back to the next committee meeting with the refusal reasons, the reasons we're going to be refusing this. We are refusing this application, so they're going to go away and come back and document as well as they can reasons for that refusal based on the discussion we've had tonight, and so that is then what goes onto the record. So then if the applicant does want to appeal, the applicant might not want to appeal. But if the applicant does, then they're appealing against the reasons that we've given, that the officers will document for us to consider at a future meeting. That's correct.
I totally understand what you're saying, Councillor
Garner.
I think
I'm happy to propose that.
Thank you. You're right. What you're saying there, a bit more detail. We know what we need, or what the committee need, and we know what the members of the public and residents are asking for. So the proposal has been made. I'd like a seconder, please. Councillor Paul Moore on the back. Members, you've heard what has been said there. Do you all agree? I agree. And that is to bring this subject back to, would it be the next, in July? An open land there's overwhelmed.
I can try and bring it back next month, yeah.
So I ask members, and again members of the public who I know, as I say, have massive concerns on this, please be patient, but we will have an outcome from this, and it will be done. And what I was going to say to Councillor Garner, we all have to do this correctly, otherwise if it backfires, the authority, I think you understand that. Thank you, members. On that, we haven't finished yet. We've still got other agenda items, but I think a 5-minute comfort break. Thank you for members of the public for listening. We'll have a few moments break. Thank you. Thank you. Righto, members, and members of the public who I believe are part of our couple of agenda items, thank you for holding on. So moving on to agenda item 5, schedule of planning applications and public speaking. Members will be pleased to know that if there are any site visits planned, they will be on the 9th of July. Let's hope, if there is a site visit, obviously, excuse me, that's when it will take place. Right, agenda item 5A is the planning application for approval, 3 The Knot, 20 Beach Road on Westgate. Speaking in favour of the application is Mr. Richards. Are you there, Mr. Richards?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I'd also like to thank officers for working collaboratively and positive experience through the process. This application seeks planning. This application seeks planning permission for the change of use to flexible community use, comprising an education facility, medical facility, or the public house and microbrewery for that to be retained. This means that only one of these uses at any point could take place. However, changing between those uses would not require formal planning permission, hence it being a flexible use. The Knot would be a community building providing one of these uses, and as such it would have strong community benefits. Policy CM02 seeks to protect existing community facilities. There has been a lack of interest and take-up of the consented public house and microbrewery to date. As such, the applicant would like the Knot to contribute positively to the local community. Other uses that would be classed as community uses include a medical facility or education facility, and these are proposed in addition to retaining the public house and microbrewery. Plan officers agree that the scheme would have benefit, particularly in terms of a new medical facility, which is specifically encouraged by policy SP38. If it was deemed to be used in this way, it would be a single treatment room as either a GP or a dentist. In terms of the education facility, this would be a local facility providing extracurricular lessons for ages 15 and over, perhaps music or core subjects. All of the proposed uses would have a community benefit, and this has been acknowledged by officers. The site is located in the Westgate Conservation Area. No alterations to the existing building are proposed, and it merely seeks change of use. The scheme will result in no impact in terms of the heritage. Turning to transport, the site is located in the town centre and is a sustainable location. The proposal is for a local facility that would be easy to walk to or cycle to. This is particularly the case if it was the education facility and GP surgery and obviously the public house. The Highway Authority have raised no objection to the proposal and have confirmed that adequate car parking will be provided. This will be in the form of 2 car parking spaces off-street. While it has been deemed that there is adequate car parking on site, there are public car parks nearby, and visitors will be directed to them from the outset. In conclusion, the proposed uses are encouraged by planning policy. There is no conflict with planning policy in this regard, and the scheme would provide benefit as a community facility, and it would make use of a vacant property at present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richards. I will now ask the planning officer to give the report. I believe it's Annabelle. Thank you.
Chair. This is the application site outlined in red, so this is the Knot, and its associated car park outlined in blue. This is an aerial view of the application site and the surrounding area of the Knot in this location here. The car park, this is Old Boundary Road, and you can see there's residential development and other development in close proximity to the site. Just a couple of pictures of the Knot, and this is another view of it. The actual application relates, as has been said, to the microbrewery and the micropub that are currently within the Knot. That is in relation to part of the basement and ground floor of the building. So this is existing basement plan, and this is a proposed basement plan, and this is the area here at the bottom of the screen that would be affected by the flexible use, and this is where it would take place. This is the existing ground floor plan, and again, this is a proposed ground floor plan, and the flexible use would take place in this location here. As has been mentioned, there are no external changes proposed, so the building will look the same externally. So it is the use that members are considering, excuse me, and as has been outlined, the three uses we're considering in this proposal for flexible use are the public house and microbrewery, so the consented use at the moment, a medical facility and an educational facility, and the nature of how those flexible uses has actually been spelt out just now by the speaker, so I won't go over that again. Officers agree that all the proposed uses are community functions, so the community function would be retained on site, and it's not considered there's any adverse impacts on residential amenities or highways that could not, if required, be controlled by condition. So the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Annabelle. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. Cook, members, do I have any speakers? No. Okay, so straight to the vote. Put it to you. Do you agree? This is for officer's recommendation. Please show of hands. Anyone against? Abstentions? I'm for that one, James. Thank you. That is carried. Thank you, members, very much. And the mic on again helps. Agenda item 5B, planning application for deferral. The land rear of 4 to number 10 Station Road, Birchington. Speaking in favour of the application is Ms. Coles. Thank you very much. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I represent Hume Planning Consultancy in making this representation to the committee on behalf of the applicant. The site constitutes, to the large part, previously developed land that occupies a highly sustainable location within the heart of Birchington. The site is located to the rear of a parade of commercial premises that front to Station Road, some of which have residential apartments above. It is proposed to develop the site to provide a pair of semi-detached dwellings that would continue the alignment of an adjacent terrace of 4 flint dwellings known as Alma Cottages. It should be noted that planning permission was granted in 2015 for the erection of a detached 2-storey dwelling with on-plot parking within part of the application site to where Unit 2 is now proposed. The pattern of development within this part of Birchington is strongly characterised by parallel terraces of modest 2-storey dwellings such as Alma Cottages and those fronting Westfield Road. The proportions, alignment and materiality of the development has been directly influenced by this prevailing character. The materials to be used for the development would be slates, flint panels, stock bricks with timber doors and windows, giving a traditional and characterful appearance to the development. This is compatible with the heritage context of the site, which includes the adjacent conservation area and 2 listed buildings, including the church. The proposal has been supported by the Council's planning and conservation officers in these terms. The case officer's evaluation of the proposal has confirmed that it is compatible with neighbouring buildings and spaces, both in terms of residential amenity of neighbouring residents and for future residents of the development. Both dwellings benefit from front and rear gardens. Access to the site is gained via a private drive leading between 10 and 12 Station Road that currently provides vehicular access to a number of existing residential properties and commercial units. Notwithstanding the grant of the 2015 permission for a dwelling with on-plot parking, in light of comments from KCC Highways, on-plot parking for the development has been removed from the proposal, and in accordance with their recommendation is now presented as car-free housing, suitable for a site within a central location such as this. Existing parking that lies outside of the site serving existing properties will remain. In all cases, statutory consultees have raised no objection and technical matters are addressed through condition. The applicant has provided a signed unilateral undertaking securing the contribution towards the Council's SAMS tariff. Within these terms, and further to the officer's positive recommendation, it is respectfully requested that members' support is given to the application, which represents a sustainable form of residential development that accords with the provision of the NPPF and the adopted development plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Coles. Speaking to in raising points of concern, Ms Brim.
She seems to have left us, Chair, for a minute.
Ms Brim. Thank you. Apologies, members. Is it okay with you, members? I think I did see Miss Brim there earlier.
Yeah, she has stuff still there.
Did you want some chips while she's down there?
It's becoming a long evening, members. I don't know if there's any football on that I'm interested in that, but I will move on to the officer's report. Is that Annabelle, please? Thank you.
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. This is the application site outlined in red. So we have Station Road running across the top of the slide here. This is the All Saints Parish Church, sorry, and we have the public house here. And as has been mentioned, the church is a listed building, grade 2, I think. Sorry. This is a aerial view of the site. So the site sits in here. The church is just off of your the slide here, but you can see some of the graveyard around it, and this is Station Road here. So this is some photographs of the site. So we have the access into the site here, that coming off Station Road. These are Alma cottages that have been referred to. It's a terrace of 4 cottages, and this is number 4 and this is number 1. This is the flank wall of number 4, and that you can see, and there are no windows at first floor level in that flank elevation, and you can see beyond that fence at the front of that elevation is part of the application site. This is the application site, and looking back towards the rear of the properties in Station Road. As has been mentioned, the majority of those properties are commercial at ground floor level, but there is some residential development above those properties. This is the application site, and you can see the spire of the church behind. And there are some buildings on the site that would be removed to make way for the proposed development. And this is actually standing in the churchyard, as you can see by the tomb on the right there. And again, looking back to the application sites, you can see the properties in Station Road beyond the rear of them, and that is the flank wall of number 4, Alma Cottages. So, as can be seen here, this is the access to the application site. This is the proposed layout of the semi-detached properties. This is the front elevation of the properties, and it's been mentioned that the materials are traditional in nature, so slates, flint detailing, stock bricks and timber doors and windows, and officers do consider the design of the properties and the materials proposed to be appropriate for this location. So just looking at the upper elevations, we have the southeast elevation, which is a flank elevation of the proposed dwellings. And this is the rear elevation and the other side elevation. Looking at the ground floor of the proposed dwellings, you can see they do not mirror each other, but they are very similar. They each have a projecting element to them. They are open plan, kitchen, living, dining room. in each property. And looking at the first floor, you'll see they're 3 beds with a family bathroom. And that's the roof plan of the site. So the dwellings do meet the required technical space standards for new developments and would be served by both front and rear gardens, and it is considered they would provide a good standard of a residential amenity for future occupiers. It's not considered there would be any adverse impact on the residential amenities of existing occupants. There is some 11 metres to the closest part of the rear of the properties facing onto Station Road, but that is actually to the single-storey ground commercial elements of those properties. The actual upper floors are set further in from the rear, and the closest upper floor element would be some 18 metres away from the proposed new development. As has been shown from the photographs, there is no first floor window in the flank wall of number 4 Alma Cottages, and there would be no first floor window also in that flank elevation of numbered unit 2 that is being proposed there. So it's not considered there would be any overlooking or adverse effect on residential amenity. As has been mentioned, the properties will not be served by car parking, but this is not considered necessary given the very sustainable location of the site. So the officers are consider the scheme to be acceptable, to not have an adverse impact on character, appearance, residential amenity, and provide a good standard of accommodation for future occupiers. And there will be no adverse impact in terms of highway safety or parking within the area. So the application is recommended for deferral back to officers to secure the sound contribution via the unilateral undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. If members can understand, Miss Brim disappeared for a moment there, but she's here this evening, so I will allow her to speak with her concerns. Miss Brim.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I apologise for my absence. This evening I'm speaking on behalf of all of the residents of Alma Cottages and some in the surrounding areas. The cottages were built in 1840 and sit within the conservation area, and over time the rural setting has become urbanised with continual development. The only rural setting remaining, which also gives winter sunlight, is the covenanted land facing the Grade 2 listed All Saints Church and its surrounding trees. The proposed development would certainly destroy this last urban section which has existed for 180 years and impact the curtilage to the listed building. A contentious point of concern regarding this application is the legal ownership of the private track connecting Station Road to Alma Cottages. This track was laid in 1840 to give access only to the cottages and until fairly recently remained solely for this purpose. Over time, a few nearby business owners have removed the original boundary walls without planning consent, thus giving them illegal vehicle access to the rear of their properties. This was opposed by the cottages, but they continue to illegally use the track and now claim they have use of this due to adverse possession. The residents feel that the development would further the misuse of their private track and question the legality of passing on access to a new development gained through adverse circumstances, which heaps harm upon harm and is not equitable. Part 3 of the Constitution determines applications made under the 1990 Town and Country Planning Act and states that the authority has the ability to exercise enforcement functions on the grounds of safety. Can you ensure that you will be exercising your enforcement powers if the no-car rule is flouted, as the Act also states that no application should be made to the detriment of others? The KCC Highways report clearly states that the private road is detrimental to road users and pedestrian safety. This also brings into question protection to the residents if the proposed development misused the area to gain vehicle access, as Part Section 6, Section 143 of the 1988 Road Traffic Act states that A person must not use a motor vehicle on a road unless there is a force in relation to the use of the vehicle by that person, such a policy of insurance or such a security in respect of third-party risks as complies with the requirement of this part of the Act. This brings into question whether a policy of insurance is valid in a proposed area that has been deemed a car-free zone by the authority, and this application is potentially prejudicial to the rights or of interested parties objecting on the grounds of health, safety and disability, and the residents would like to request a site visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Brim. Thank you for that as well, James. I move the officer's recommendation is adopted. Vice Chair, please second.
I'll second that, Chair.
Members, do you wish to debate at all? Councillor Wright.
Mr. Chairman, I actually do agree that I think the committee would benefit from a site visit. I do, as one of the ward councillors for South Birchington South, I do feel that this development would be detrimental to the conservation area, cramped and overbearing. Parking, I'm not quite sure where the officer thinks any cars will be parked. Parking in Birchington, and I think there are two other councillors here from Birchington will agree, parking is at a premium in Birchington, and there is nowhere for any other extra cars to park. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Do I see any other members wish to speak? Councillor Rozeski.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Wright. A site visit is essential. Thank you.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Annabelle about the views on the vehicular access, can't say it, that Brim has raised. Thank you.
Are you able to, Annabelle?
I'll try and come back, yes. It is not proposed, as we've seen, that the proposed dwellings will have car parking spaces, so it is unlikely in their own right that they may well be attracting vehicular access coming through, and the highway comments are set out in the report. Whether or not there are caveats or legal restrictions on the use of that vehicular access is not something that we consider as a planning matter. It is a civil matter, but if there were, that would be a matter to be dealt with by local residents and the developer if it came to that. It is a sustainable location, obviously close to a church, public house and many other facilities that this site, surrounding area offers, so it is not considered necessary by officers that these houses should have car parking, and it is considered there are public car parks and various other areas that parking could take place, albeit it might be some distance potentially in, but not within walking distance of these properties should future occupiers choose to have a car.
Thank you, Annabelle. Councillor Moore. Paul Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Annabelle, you say that there's no requirement for parking, but you did say on the drawings that it's got a front garden and rear gardens. Could those front gardens then inadvertently have vehicles parked on them once they're developed? And if so, would it be a condition of planning that there is no parking on those front lawns? Thank you.
Annabelle.
There are some permitted development rights that do allow the creation of vehicular accesses to front gardens. I don't unfortunately have the report in front of me, apologies, so I don't know if it is conditioned, but if members thought it necessary, that could be conditioned that that permitted development right is taken away in this instance. Sorry, we're just checking what the report actually says.
Okay, I'll come to Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, to just go back to the parking, I mean, to say that that they can park within walking distance shows there's complete lack of knowledge of parking in Birchington. I mean, these look like two family homes, which you could possibly 4 cars. I mean, there is just no parking within walking distance in Birchington. It is chock-a-block. It's all residents permits and limited parking bays, 1 hour parking bays all around Birches and all around the area and double yellow line. So to say there's parking within walking distance, you're then going to be burdening other people's parking.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Ian, have you found?
Thank you, Chair. There's a specific high-risk condition which relates actually to condition surveys for during construction, but there's no restriction on removing permitted development rights for effectively creation of hard standing on the front garden. Now there is a condition which relates to the actual plans that have been submitted, so there is a condition which would restrict the development deviating from that. But as it stands, there isn't the removal of permitted development rights to create hard standing. So members, if they considered necessary, would be able to impose that condition to avoid in the future an owner creating a car parking space, which could potentially lead to use of an access, which obviously, as mentioned, there are concerns about in terms of visibility, etc. But obviously there is the opposing view. I know that obviously that's being discussed about whether or not parking is actually needed for these units because obviously of what potentially could happen with regards to displacement of existing parking. I think to just come back to that point, it is a very sustainable location, and I appreciate that the concerns that members have continued raised is that actually people will want to have cars, and obviously we had this with the Addington Place application a month or so ago. But it is obviously something that wouldn't result in the highways view and also in our view on a severe impact on the network for 2 units requiring parking in and around the area, in our view. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Any other speakers at all? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to ask about the, I know there are 6 trees in relation to the site, 5 of them not actually on the site but very close, and 1 on the site which I understand is has been rather unsympathetically pruned, in the words of the biodiversity officer, and I assume is going to be lost as a result of this. So I'm just seeking assurances that the other 5 trees aren't going to have their root protection area affected by any of this development. And also, I see there's a condition for a soft and hard landscaping plan to be prepared and presented before any and delivered before any occupation. Can you tell me sort of how are there going to be what new planting you're expecting on the site as a result of that? And I know I've been in touch with enforcement on a number of other developments in my ward where soft and hard landscaping plans have been as a condition and then not delivered. So I know you can't assure me at this meeting that this soft landscaping plan would be delivered before any occupation, but I'm just raising that as a concern that I have, that we pass these conditions but then we don't make sure that they're delivered. So I am sort of seeking some assurance on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Don't worry, Councillor Whitehead. I thought we had a new member of the council sitting up the back there. So, Annabelle, did you want to come back on that, or?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. There is a plan actually here that actually details the soft landscaping here. I think the condition is to draw on this plan and build upon it, and to give more detailing, as you say, on actual sort of boundary treatments and things like that, as well as, but we wouldn't necessarily normally require for a couple of dwellings the details of precise planting, because they are someone's effective garden, so it would be a fairly generic planting proposed landscaping scheme that we'd expect to come forward, rather than, you know, just to ensure that there is planting and it isn't a bare site, but not, you know, ridiculously high levels of detail But if it wasn't to come forward, we could secure that and look to force against, you know, the non-submission of the plan.
Sorry, if I could just come back. Yeah, as long as if it's the landscaping, if it's green, i.e. it's not going to be hard concrete over it, then that's certainly acceptable, because I've seen others where it said it was going to be green and there's not one bit of green on the site at all. So that's what I'm seeking to ensure assurance that, and that would help with the car parking as well. Make sure it's garden instead of concrete.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Palmer. Oh, sorry. Carry on. Sorry.
Thank you. Looking at all the photographs and the maps and everything else, to use a very technical term, it looks like they're trying to squidge in two rather large buildings into a relatively small space, whose own vista is not going to be that wonderful, looking out on the backs of some other properties or whatever. And I would certainly support what was said earlier about at least having a site visit.
Thank you. Sorry I missed you there. Councillor Palmer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to reaffirm what Councillor Garner was saying, that if the permitted development rights were removed for any hard standing, then it would always be a Greenswood area on that area. Thank you.
Thank you. No other speakers? I'll make sure that, yes, you can. Yes, Mr. Mr.
So rather than whisper in the chair's ear, I'll make it so that everyone can hear it. No, not telling off at all. Members have already raised the issue about removing PD rights. A few of you have mentioned about removing PD rights because of this particular concern. I think on that basis that if the chair and vice chair as proposer and seconder would agree, then we could amend the motion that's before members, if both parties agreed, to include a condition which would specifically remove permitted development rights under Class F of the GPDO Schedule 2, Part A, Part 1, that would then basically take away the ability for someone to put a hard surface down without needing planning permission. So they could still apply for planning permission for it, but they couldn't do it without that being considered by this council. So if that was agreeable.
Yes, I do understand. Do you understand that, Councillor Vice Chairman?
Understood, yeah.
Thank you. Right, that we'll agree. And members agree? Yeah, just the two of us. Right. Okay, any other speakers at all? Right, I've got to put this to you for recommendation to defer or for approval. I know a site visit was mentioned, but we'll come to that in a moment. Those in favour for deferral, please show. Those against? Abstentions? Right. No, it's not. No, can we do that again, please? I know it's getting late, but...
I think I've got those in favour.
Those in favour. This is not for a site visit. This is for approval of the deferring to officers.
Okay. Are you including that as well, Chair?
Yes. Okay. Those against? No. Abstentions? That's been carried, yes?
That has been carried, thank you.
Thank you, that has been carried there, members. Thank you. That concludes the public speaking for this evening. I will now ask James to read out those planning applications. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Garner. But that's what I was trying to explain to you there. You voted, you abstained. Yes? You abstained.
You said you'd come back to it.
You said you'd come back to the site.
Ah, but it's been voted through that for the officer's recommendation was to approve. Well,
Can I make a motion?
was, yes.
The motion that was on the table was voted on. If that motion gets voted down, it moves to the next motion, which could be proposal for a site visit. Obviously, the majority of the committee voted to approve the motion that was on the table.
No, no, I don't think we can we?
There was still a majority of people in favour.
I'll come in here. It's clear enough on the paperwork what we were asking, what I asked you to vote for, and it's in front of you as well, members. The officer's recommendation is to defer for approval, and that's what I have to ask you to start with. You showed your hands, and those were in favour. Miss Brim, please. You're not in the council now. I would have come back if that motion had been lost, and then put it to members again for a site visit.
That wasn't clear.
Councillor Bayford.
I just want to say we've all been trained in planning. We know the rules.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I can't accept that people didn't know what they were voting for.
No, I mean, that's how, I looked at, I know James counts the numbers here. The numbers you saw.
We had 8 in favour, so that's more than. We had 6 abstentions, so it's not enough to make a difference anyway.
I'm sorry, but it's again, it is on our reports in front of us how voting should go, or not how you vote. But okay, we go back to the conclusion of public speaking. I will call upon James, if you would, for those items on the agenda that haven't been called. James.
Thank you, Chair. So the remaining items haven't been called then is 5B, which is Ellington Park Ramsgate, 5C, 60 Northumberland Avenue, 5D, Croquet Lawns, the Royal Esplanade, and 5E, which is 14 St John's Avenue.
Thank you, James. Does anybody wish to speak on any of those items? Can't see any hands going up. So therefore, could I have a proposal that those applications are moved? Proposal, please. There's 2. Councillor Rozeski, seconder. Several hands up there. Take your pick, James. Do members agree? Thank you, members. Apologies for that misunderstanding there, but say it is like I've got, it is in front of us. So therefore, the public, I'll ask James just to go through those applications once again, and then we will call an end to the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So those applications were Ellington Park Ramsgate, 60 Northumberland Avenue Margate, Croquet Lawns, Royal Esplanade Ramsgate, and 14 St John's Avenue Ramsgate. Thank you.
Thank you, members. That concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and take care. Safe journey home.